We're going to start in just a moment here. All right. All right, looks like we're going to get started here. I may get interrupted by people coming in. But I'm going to try to honor starting on time and getting everyone out of here by 6:45. And so I'd like to thank everyone for coming out today. I very much appreciate people online coming out and listening to what I have to say about this new project that I've been working on, for about 6 months now. And I really, as I dove into this project, it really became more and more about the philosophy behind the project, along with kind of, creating the whole, background of it. And so I want to, since I'm amongst friends here, just kind of talk a little more about obviously the project and how y'all can help, but also just the whole philosophy behind it and what I'm seeing that is new that is happening in art right now. So just to get started, let's see, I'm still new at this. There we go. All right, so hopefully y'all can see that, but basically, to summarize this whole project, the idea is for me to play court artist for one system-involved youth in New Orleans over the course of a year. Okay, then as this resident, I'm going to be painting pictures of him in the hopes of the end product selling in a gallery in museums for $20,000 towards his college education fund. Okay, so I came about this project with 24 years working with youth in all sorts of ages, all sorts of demographics, urban, suburban, all over the place, all throughout since I was 16 and now I'm 40, in the foster care system, et cetera. And so when I was community organizer dealing with violence on the streets of New Orleans, we often talk about, what can keep a kid away from the temptations of the corner. It is a power that growing up in the suburbs, I never really had to face at 8, 9, 10 years old. So, but I tried to listen to the people who went through it and come up with some type of criteria for the ways that we can engage the youth such that they don't go towards that temptation of the street. And the first is vision. The biggest thing is if a child has a vision, a goal, a dream, that is the most powerful way that he can combat and stand against the things that are on the streets. And so with this project, we're doing all the art and doing all the paintings, but I wanted something concrete that this could bring forth to spur this child on to their future, right? Something concrete after the fact, after I'm gone, after the residency is done, what is going to happen? Well, now this child has $20,000 towards their college fund. And that is something that is going to redefine his future and redefine who he is, right? He is now someone who is college bound. That is who he is. And during that tough time of 18, we just saw 2 mass shooters at 18. It's a time of turmoil within young men's lives. He knows that he is going off to college to learn a trade, a liberal art, and further his mind, for down the road. And so The other aspect of this is that the youth need mediators of their vision, right? And this is something that I think we as a whole do very poorly. I think that we say, okay, well, they have the vision, let them go about, do it themselves. But what the child needs is a mediator towards that vision. And what that means is someone that's hands-on, someone who's challenging their opinions, who's inspiring them, who's showing them, how they can get around their shortfalls, their mistakes, all towards, meeting that goal, making that goal real in a day-to-day life is something that I think we miss completely with a lot of the programs that we have for our youth in trying to engage them and keep them off the streets. And so the whole idea behind this program, this project, the Epic of Desmond James, is that education is going to play a very large role, not only in this changing of the minds of this child, but also in the picture-making process. And what I've come about is a curriculum called the Education of Eidos. Eidos means idea in Greek. And so it actually takes its roots from Plato and the Republic and the myth of the cave, which we'll talk about, later on. But the education of Eidos is reading, writing, discussing, engaging, meditating, and creating. Those are all the sort of aspects of this education. And over the course of the year, I will be meeting with this young man once a week for classes, right? And these classes will be part of that education, right? And it will be to put him in contact with the higher spiritual aspects of his character, right? These classes are really what you could call an aesthetic education, right? It's a curriculum that is focused on the youth experiencing the possibility of greatness and beauty through aesthetic experiences, okay? So what this really does, this education at Eidos that will be brought in as part of the art making process, what it's going to do is allow for self-examination of this young man. And what my belief is, having gone through liberal arts and engaging with philosophy, is that the soul reveals itself in its higher aspirations, and the defects of that soul reveal itself against the background of the highest aspirations, right? We can gauge, we can see who we are when we're put in front of something that is higher than us, that is bigger than us. We instantly see how we measure and how we need to we need to find strength to get better, okay? So this whole idea is to mediate that vision, flesh out that vision. This education is bringing this child in, giving him, a time to think about his future, flesh it out, who he is, who he was, who he's going to be, all for the purpose of, seeing, who he will be in the future. And I think that the most important thing that I've heard over and over again is for this youth to understand the significance of his life. When you read the comments in shootings, it's always saying they don't respect their own life. Why would they respect others? So I think there's some truth to that. But how do you make a child understand their own significance? Love is an obvious answer. Time, those types of things. But what I see is that art can help give significance to a child, show them that they are important, that they are important actors in the grand history of the world, right? So this art in its final display will be king-size portraits of this youth's life. And it will be abstract, the colorful abstract, expressionism, like my jacket that is part of my fashion line, along mixed with the kind of colorful pop realism that I use in the figures in my artwork. And I wanted to combine those to bring this awesome effect of feeling like you're amidst something great, something important is happening on this canvas and was happening to this young man. So that's the whole idea behind it. Overall, when I came to New Orleans, I wanted to figure out, I guess, one thing, and it's that grand philosophical question: what is the good life, right? It's taken me some time to realize that that's really what I was trying to answer, because when you're talking to youth, and that they have a past, in prison, they have a past of selling drugs, passive abuse, passive substance abuse, all these things, you're trying to convince them that violent life is not worth living, that life of the street is not worth living, and there's higher alternatives, right? That there's possibilities for his soul to reach towards. And you're trying to persuade him, right, through speech, through art, whatever we have, that there is a life out there that is worth living, that you need to shed that violent, tyrannical life towards, a life of truth, life of philosophy, perhaps, right? And that's really what I think that this project kind of encompasses. Is the question in the Plato's Republic is, the tyrant versus the philosopher. And so all this project kind of talks about these larger things. That's where I kind of came up with the concept of this all. And I think it's because I really want to do something new in art. And that's because I feel like something is happening within the art world, and there's new needs for the 21st century, and the art world is just not stacking up to meeting those needs. And so I've always felt, since being a community organizer, and seeing the violence that was happening, seeing the lack of love of and dignity of human life, that the artist role needed to find some way to fill that role in. And so I believe that the role of the artist has fundamentally changed. It's already started to go through that process. And now the artist, what I'm seeing, gives shape to human powers, right? And facilitates an ideal into the real. Really, overall, what I see right now is that the artist is now a midwife of an ideal, right? And this is part of what I call aesthetic idealism. And to flesh this out, to talk about this a little more, I want to bring in some aspects of art so you can see, the line of thinking, see examples of this, how it's playing out in history and right now. And so I'm going to talk about two artists, one being Paul Rubens and the other being Kehinde Wiley, who created these beautiful pieces of work. Paul Rubens, I fell in love with during the pandemic because, like everyone, I was at home. And while watching TV at night, I would pick up all of the books that I had on my shelf that I had ignored for years and start leafing through them. And I became so intrigued that, the coffee table stacked with, gigantic books of Raphael and Michelangelo and the Renaissance and, all these great figures, because I was falling in love with the masters and hearing, what they had to say about art then, and what they were thinking about throughout their life. And so the person who really struck me was Paul Rubens, who at the height of his career was asked to be the court artist for the Queen of France. And from his journal, he said that basically the Queen of France was a very dull person. The most interesting thing, I think, was that the king was out in Europe doing his thing. And the king wasn't actually present during his marriage to the queen. He had a stand-in there, and it's actually documented by Paul Rubens in one of the paintings that he does during his residency. And so, because her life was so dull and just at home, not really engaging in the great politics, right? It took Paul's genius to instill her life with imagination, create an enchanting landscape around her, filled with eros and myth and philosophy and history, right? So that you felt like you were in the presence of someone of significance and importance and royalty. And so, one of the things that, finally at the end, he presented his paintings, and they're in the Louvre, which used to be the palace in France, and it makes up an entire gigantic room. And he's filled with, I think, about 20 paintings that are 13 by 10, and they're absolutely gorgeous. Definitely the most gorgeous paintings of that century, and probably top 5 as far as a series goes, in world history. And so what I learned from that was this idea of immersion. Put yourself where the person you want to model, put yourself there in their daily life so that you can witness everything that happens. You can see their character as it is revealed, not in one photo shoot as you're passing as a tourist through a town, but as you live with them, you grow with them, you study with them and eat with them, you see the subtle movements of the soul that make great art. And that's what I really latched onto. We need to immerse ourselves with our models. We can't just go into New Orleans, take some pictures and think that represents some folks. No, we need to live with them. And so that was a big part of what I learned from Rubens. And the other artist that I want to talk about, and this is an artist that I believe is sort of the beginning of this aesthetic idealism, is Kehinde Wiley. And you may know Kehinde Wiley from painting the Barack Obama portraits, and that's touring around America right now. But I actually encountered Wiley when I was a communal organizer. I was on the streets dealing with violence, attending funerals, hundreds of funerals of young Black men that were shot on the streets, and looking at newspapers, just seeing their histories being forced down into just a couple of sentences, maybe about their prison record. And that's about it. And that's how kind of the mass culture was seeing these young men and their worth in life. And then I see Wiley on a cover, and it's just absolutely stark and beautiful. The depictions he has filled with color and motion and majesty that he has with these young Black men. And it's so different than how mass media or mass culture depicts them that it always stuck in my mind. Even though it was 2010 and I wasn't even drawing or painting, I knew that was something that always would stay there, because the way he brought in he brought me to this new world that I hadn't even thought about, this new nature that I had written about these young men and heard about, but I saw first and foremost right there on the magazine cover. And so what Wiley does, he has this process that is unlike anything that I've seen in history of art. And it's very unique, and it's very revolutionary. That's what I think it is. It's caught my attention as a community organizer, the way he uses the model or the power of art to create art. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So what Wiley does is he does a process called street casting, okay, where he goes, and he started off in New York and Brooklyn, and he would go out into the street, he'd survey the street, and he'd find that young man with some swagger. And he'd approach that young man and try to persuade that young man to go up and to the studio to do a photo shoot, talking about making this giant portrait of them. And so sometimes they were reluctant, but they went up, and he would have art books of all the greats, 16th, 17th, 18th century art, history books. And he would say, look at these art books, pick out the painting that you feel represents you. And that's exactly what they did. They would look through these art books for, an hour or so. And then they would say, well, this one really spoke to me the most. This one is me. This is my self-expression. Even though these are pictures of, kings and queens and aristocrats throughout the centuries, this young Black man in the 21st century is saying, yes, this is me. This is my soul here, way back when. And so, what he does is that, they depict that painting, they appropriate it, and basically the young black man stands in for, the model that was in that large painting back in the day. And so really, this is the final product is this young man in this world, in this realm of kings. That's the only people who made, art this way is the kings and royalty, someone really important to, put on canvas, put in gold frames, put in museums and institutions, and to show the king's splendor and power. Okay. And so what Wiley did, I felt really shifted. There's a shift, in the zeitgeist of our age with Wiley, and that he sees the artist's new role. He's crafting content in a deliberate and thoughtful way. Okay. He's bringing those books out. He's letting that young man engage with the book, and he's selecting those books. Okay. The fact that they're books and that they're art, and they're art from 16th, 17th, 18th century rather than modern art. And he's letting them kind of rest with those things and survey them, on their own. It's sort of education, right? And he's doing this all so that to give shape to human powers, right? So that you will have something fantastic and odd and interesting, like these final paintings that he depicts. And so he's subjecting his model to an aesthetic experience in order to reveal the model in a higher realm of existence, right? A realm of kings, politicians, and aristocrats, the realm of power as he sees it. And so, what he does, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about him, way more than I think is healthy, right? Is that I was very interested in what he was doing. And so I tried to sort of philosophize about this and understand, where we were at with all of this. And so what I came to understand is that he took the mass culture perception. Okay, he started with a picture of a young black man in the newspaper. It was a mugshot he saw on the paper, he saw in the street, and he actually started painting that. And I've seen that photo. I've read those descriptions, and that's exactly, for the most part, how mass culture depicts these young black men. And what he does is he's taking that mass culture perception that, they have of them, and then maybe perhaps even that young man has about himself, and he interrupts it through an aesthetic experience. Hey, how you doing, man? Come on out. I just started. Help yourself with some food too. And so, basically through this aesthetic experience, he goes into this realm of an ideal. We're talking about Kehinde Wiley in this past one, and he brings him to this realm of ideals. So basically, what happens is what Wiley is doing is he has an aesthetic experience with looking at these books, these young men looking at these books with of the art books, and he is trying to engage him and bring that young man to this higher ideal, where we can all see a higher nature with this young man. And so what I began to see is that, look, let's take this aesthetic experience that Wiley did with bringing the books, and let's elongate it, let's exaggerate it. That's a really interesting part of the process. So if we start exaggerating that aesthetic experience that Wiley had, then really what we're talking about education. We're talking about aesthetic education, right? And so basically we're creating a curriculum so that the character of the model will be revealed to both the model himself and the audience, okay? So we're taking this process of the aesthetic experience, and we're saying, look, this is really about education, okay? This is about bringing education into art as a way to help in the picture-making process. And that's what I find interesting as a community organizer. You're interjecting this idea of education into the art-making process. Because every time there's a shooting, the first thing you hear, it's about education, it's about education. Well, that's true. But what kind of education? What is the best education? How do we get that young man to see himself in a way that he sees significance in his life? How do we make the ideal education? And so this aesthetic idealism is bringing education to the forefront of art making process. And we're asking the question, what is the ideal education? And I think that's something that we should all be asking, all around the city. How do we build an education such that we keep that child from the temptations of the streets? And so as we think about and philosophize about education, the ideal education, my own history is interesting with education. At 18, I had been suspended several times from school, and I was as close to being expelled as possible from my high school, my senior year. And that time was very dark. It was very hard. I had a lot of shame. I had a lot of just feelings of being without purpose, without having meaning. Just dread surrounded me. And I had this pain about me. And I really couldn't understand my own self within that action. I didn't understand the nature that was coming out. Because I knew that person wasn't me that was doing those acts, but yet it was me. And that's how the community and the school was perceiving me. And so I was lucky enough to enroll at St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, which is the Great Books program. And the great books are simply the greatest, thoughts and thinkers throughout history. They're the name brands of philosophy, literature, poetry, science, and mathematics. Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Aristophanes, Euripides, all the way to the Bible, and Aquinas, and Nietzsche, and all the existentialists. So that's what I kind of brought myself into, and it was exactly what I needed at that point in my life. As I went in, I immersed myself in those books because I was looking for answers. I was so thirsty for knowledge, and I would spend 12, 15 hours in the library reading every book 4 or 5 times, just trying to glean every bit of truth and wisdom from those books. And one of the books that I came encounter with was Plato's Republic. Now, every young man, I can't say every, but if you're open-minded young man, if you meet Plato without prejudice, you fall in love with Socrates and the world of wisdom around him. It's funny, it's interesting, it's crazy. It's just a very odd world that he creates around this figure of Socrates. And so I fell in love with that. And I started reading The Republic, which is the idea of education of Plato. And really what the Republic is about the philosophy, about the education of a philosopher. It is the best case scenario. How do we get these young men to think of the highest things? That's what Plato's education is. And to me, it's the ideal education. It's the greatest example of education. And so what I'm going to look at right here, and because it's kind of relevant to our discussion, is the myth of the cave. And this is what it all comes down to. So we're kind of bring you full loop here. We looked at Wiley and his process. We looked at how he used aesthetic experiences to flesh out this ideal world, this world of kings. And then we decided, okay, let's take this aesthetic experiences that Wiley was doing, let's elongate it, let's exaggerate it so that we have a whole education over a year. So instead of that young man just reading one book over an hour, what if he comes back the next week and he goes to the museum with the artist? What if he starts engaging in art creation? What is that ideal education? And so we've come here where we're trying to understand what the best education is for the purpose of creating the highest art. And so the myth of the cave is the highest example of education. And so to review it, it's one of those images, once you see it, you'll never forget it, because it is probably the greatest image in Western philosophy. So here you have the description of humanity, which is chained down, staring at the shadows on the wall of a cave, right? You see these men, all they can do is look at each other, look at the shadows that are being cast, and they can't see behind them because there's a large wall. Behind that wall, there's other men with statues that are bringing objects forward. And those, because of the fire, are casting shadows onto the wall. And so these prisoners, all they know is the shadows. That's their whole life, is the shadows. They argue with the shadows. They, get passionate about the shadows, but they're just shadows. Okay? And then in the story of the myth of the cave, a teacher comes along and compels one of the prisoners to look behind him. Okay? And when the prisoner looks behind him and breaks the chains, he sees this is all farce. This is all set up. This is just shadows. And this is, he sees the wall, he sees the men, he sees the fire. He knows that that's not true. And so he goes towards the true light that comes out of the cave. And so what you're seeing here is that ascension out of the cave. I always imagine a very rocky, crazy, hard, mountain going up to the light of the cave. And all the while, the teacher's kind of coercing him, persuading him to move forward, much like a mentor in life, right? And so when the prisoner is out in the cave, he sees the thing as they truly are. He sees the sun, the light. He is stung by, how awesome that light is, because all he knew was darkness before. And so he sees the tree for itself. He sees the water for itself. He sees all of it lit up with sun, with truth. He is truly in the world of ideas. And that's exactly where the idea of eidos comes from. Eidos meaning idea. Hence the education of eidos, which we'll talk about. And so after that, the prisoner actually goes back into the cave. I could never really understand why. That's always one of those questions. You're like, why wouldn't he just stay here? But he goes back in the cave and he lives this odd existence where he stays with the prisoners because he craves the shadows in a way. He craves people. He has a longing for his comrades, right? But he knows it's all farce. So he has an eye towards the shadows, and then he has an eye towards the truth out there. He has an eye towards the whole. He sees, absolute beauty. And so it's this odd existence of living between these two worlds that this prisoner has gone into. And so basically what I'm talking about is that an ideal education follows this pattern. It goes from the common to the heights. It goes from the material world towards the soul. It goes from the shadows to the light. It goes from the particular day-to-day obscurity to the absolute of beauty and truth. And, just an absolute world of ideas, right? So as I made education part of the art making process, inspired by Wiley, I sat down and I said, okay, well, how do we flesh this out? How do we flesh out a philosophic education for this 12-year-old boy who has gone to prison? He's not an ideal student probably. He's gone through it all. How are we going to engage him so that he goes towards the eidos, towards the ideas, goes towards the philosophic life? And so that's when I came up with the education of eidos. And what this is a series of reading, writing, discussion, meditation, and creation. And so basically, it starts off with writing your autobiography. He writes his own biography. So my thinking is, if you can write about it, you're thinking about it. If you can write about the past, you're getting some distance from that goal, and you start seeing things as they are. Once you write it and put it in concrete, you're able to give yourself distance, and you're able to start setting goals and visions for the future. And so he'll be writing about the past, the present, and the future. And through it all, through his thinking, he's able to conceptualize the good life, right? What is that thing that he's going to leave behind the life of the streets towards that bigger idea? The mentor can't flesh it out for them. they have to think it through. They have to see what they want within their own soul. And that's what writing does. But it's hard. It's probably one of the most difficult things, not only that 12-year-old do, but most men are not courageous enough to write their own autobiography. And that is part of the reason why throughout this education, we are paying this model handsomely, because this is a lot harder than, mopping up and closing up at McDonald's. Sitting down, thinking about your life as past, present, and future and who you want to be. That's about the hardest thing you can do. And so the second part is the Great Books Seminar. And so the great books, as we said, are those big names. But just because they're big names of philosophy and literature doesn't mean they are the most difficult things. They're not Kant or Hegel, right? Those German philosophers that are just, okay? A lot of them are like the Bible, where, the Bible and the Epic of Gilgamesh and Plato, a 70-year-old scholar, genius, can read it and get something out of it, and a 13-year-old kid from New Orleans can read it and get something out of it for their life. And that's what makes them great. It applies to you when you're 13, and it applies to you when you're 7. You're always going to find something new that's relevant to your life. And the key is to find something that's relevant to his life, so that he sees that, yes, this isn't just reading for a grade. This is for understanding who I am right now, understanding my nature. And so the idea is, when you start dealing with these great books, you're starting to deal with these big words. During the course of the day, we talk about the myopic things. We're talking about deadlines. We're talking about sports, news. We get wrapped up in those shadows on the wall. We don't get to address the soul as much as we should. And this is a time when you're reading the great books, he starts thinking about, what is truth? What is courage? What is, the soul? What is violence? What is peace? Those are things that don't get addressed definitely in their day-to-day life and their peers, and probably doesn't get addressed within the context of their education in a school. And so the third one is dialogue. We live in a democracy. It's based on dialogue through logos. That's what we're about, through the account. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go out and we're going to find out what he loves. And then I'm going to make him give an account of why he loves these things. So that there's things that naturally he tends towards. Let's not judge, let's let him go towards those things. And then let's investigate. Why do they love that thing? And what else can you love that is similar? So the artist then becomes matchmaker for these interests, so that they can kind of move up that ladder of love towards things that are higher than necessarily the things that they start out with. And the fourth is thinking, self-knowledge. That's the basis of any good education, right? In this process, we're going to be doing meditation. I remember every single time that I had to go in time out and meditate as a kid. I remember several times I felt like I was going to keel over and die of boredom, because it is hard. And what happens is you go through the first couple of thoughts and it just runs over you, and you get angry and you feel all these emotions, but then your soul starts resting into bigger thoughts, and you start thinking about those bigger ideas of your life, because an hour is an infinite amount of time when you have nothing to do with things. And so that's part of it, is thinking and diving into his imagination, so he can start thinking about who he is and who he wants to be. The last one is creating their myth. So that this is my favorite, so that they create their narrative, okay? That's very important that we talk about that. Throughout this whole process, he's going to be talking about these higher aspirations. He's going to engage himself with these higher aspirations. And he's going to engage in this education. This is very difficult. And throughout that process, he's going to learn about himself. And he is going to be the co-creator of these paintings along with the artist. And that's what's important. That's what he is going to take these experiences and figure out the narrative of what he wants to say about who he was, who he is, and who he wants to be. And the artist is just facilitating that dream, that vision, and allowing this young man to think all the way through all the components of a painting, the wardrobe, the lighting, the meaning, the symbols. These are all things that we are going to confront through dialogue with this young man, so that at the end of the year, and he sees these paintings, He thinks this wasn't just some tourist artist that came through, took my picture and put it on a wall. This was a man who listened to every single thought I ever had for a year and allowed me to put my own thoughts onto canvas so that he can see his life on canvas, and it's concrete, it's visible, and he can move on from some of those errors, and he can go towards that light that he sees held within the beautiful pictures. And so I'm going to go a little bit wider here before I get a little more specific. I'm in that very odd space where I love philosophy, but I also love community organizing. So I dwell in that odd space between poetry and I guess politics, you can even say. And so this is the second part of so what I want to talk about is this bigger idea of aesthetic idealism, which is really what I think is going to help the community, help artists, and is the new role for the artist going into the 21st century. So I really tried to define this because I've seen it in Wiley's work. I've seen it in street art. There's B. Mike is working in New Orleans. I've known him for a very long time. I feel like there's components of this movement within his work. And so what I want to define is so that we can see how we can use it. So aesthetic idealism is art that uses aesthetic experiences in the process of picture making in order to reveal the nature of the object or model previously obscured by public dogma. Okay? What that basically means is someone like Wiley, that aesthetic experience is that book, that bringing that child to confront that book, to encounter that book of art, okay? And then through that, letting that be part of the picture-making process as the artist, so that when they take the picture, it is now in a different realm, the realm of the ideal, the realm of the kings, right? The realm of power that Wiley wants to bring us to. And so it's revealing this nature that is previously obscured by public dogma, by the mass culture, right? If Wiley was a lesser artist, he would take a picture of that young man where he was when he saw him, right? Maybe on the street, maybe leaning against a building, smoking a cigarette, right? And he would paint that and put it up on concrete. But what he does is he goes through this whole process, using the aesthetic experiences, using education as a mediator towards bringing that person towards an ideal, that we see the final act is this young black man as a king, right? As something that if we just looked at a painting of him on this young on the street, it would look like night and day, the difference between the two natures and the effects on them. So within my own art, that idea is that we use aesthetic experiences, the idea of creating aesthetic education, which is a series of aesthetic experiences, right? As part of the picture making process. It's over a year, we're growing, we're learning. This young man is, revealing things about himself. And finally, this young man is seen not with the public dogma, not with that stigma of being a juvenile delinquent, but in the splendor of being a soul, a human soul, a beautiful human soul that is young and full of potential and hope. And that's where I'm trying to go with all this. And so the idea now that I hear a lot is that the artist now is a catalyst, okay? But a catalyst for what? What I see is he's a catalyst for second nature, okay? That movement of nature, art, nature. That's kind of what I'm talking about, right? And so this artist is, through education, being a catalyst, drawing, persuading this young man out of the shadows into the light, into the Anos, right? And so that's what we're kind of talking about here. If I can take a step back and think about the aesthetic idealism, I believe it is art that points beyond itself, And what I mean is that philosophy is above it. Philosophy is above art, right? The philosopher above the poets. And what I mean by that is that to philosophize, Leo Strauss said that philosophizing was the movement out of the cave, the ascent out of the cave to the light of truth, right? That's what philosophizing is, and that's from obviously the depiction of the myth of the cave, right? And so when we think about that, that's what this whole aesthetic idealism is trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do with all of this, is that being a resident there with this young man, seeing the small movements of his soul, seeing the way he is persuaded away from his opinions that are within the shadows, right? That are part of that shadow world, and allowing him to break free towards, the light, towards the ideal, outside the cave, where he can see these higher aspirations of his soul, this higher future that is in store for him outside that violent life that he once lived. And so really what aesthetic idealism does is it documents philosophy. It documents that movement of the soul that is the ascent out of the cave. And so to put it all, in perspective, I am trying to challenge the new role of the artist in this project. It came about from the philosophizing of what is the good life, what is the new role for the artist. And what I'm seeing here is that there is real social impact, obviously. That this child is going to get engaged in education that is high and above, what he could ever get. He's going to get, funds to be at college. And these are all things that are impact him immediately. He's going to get paid for his modeling, for his thinking. And, finally, what's going to happen is, he's going to see himself in a different light, different perspective. Just 6 gigantic, epic paintings of himself. I can only imagine being 12 years old and seeing that force of love enter your visual realm. It would be quite staggering. And so what I see, too, is that the role of the artist has changed, and that the artist is no longer this solitary visionary, right, that is away from the community, up on the mountains. Like we talk about a genius, there's this distance with them. But really, the community is essential to the picture-making process, meaning that this young man has to be part of the picture-making process, because documenting this young man from the beginning, where he's in the shadows, to the ideal, that's the whole crux of aesthetic idealism. That's the whole crux of the issue, that we're trying to portray that movement. And so it can't just be imaginary. It has to happen in real life with our closer encounters with the youth in our communities, engaging them, and with encounters that of a higher spiritual aspect of themselves, so they can see themselves differently than the way the current culture depicts them. And so we start with the opinions of himself, how he looks at himself, and that way we can lead him all the way out into this world of Eidos, right? And so I'm going to switch gears here and talk about a little bit about the nuts and bolts of this project. Very quickly, I do want to get out of here. I'm actually 10 minutes over, but I do want to talk about the budget briefly. What I'm trying to do is raise $20,000 for this young man, for his college fund. What it's going to take is it's going to take about $12,000 to do it. And then I take no cut of that. I make no money off of the work over the year of making these 6 paintings. Where that money goes towards, first and foremost, is money for this young man. Okay, pay this young man the work that he's going to do dealing with this stuff, dealing with the hardest stuff he'll ever do. painting materials, I need giant canvases. I'm sorry, I just need them. I need them to fill up a whole area and show and see what it is, to look like a king on canvas. So these things are going to be 13 by 10. That is expensive. That's almost the majority of the budget. Props and wardrobe. I need this to be like a small budget film because we are in the realm of kings. We need these props to be real. As you saw, if you saw the throne of books there, I started drawing that, and it was not real. It was horrible. It looked horrible. And then I had to actually construct it. So I constructed over the course of several months to actually paint and do all that stuff because I needed to see the shadow. It needed to have weight. So you need to make those props. Artists are great. They have great imagination, but it looks better when it's, out there. It's very real. And so, you can look more on that on the website. But I do want to get to the last part, which is the donation. And you can, go into at the bottom here, charlesandersonart.com/epic. And that tells you everything along with the gift levels if you need to sign off. And it also tells you about the budget and the whole project and what I'm spending on. But the idea behind this is that with these donations, you're allowing me to experience art. Art is an experience. You're allowing me to experience art. You're allowing this young man to experience art. But I want you to experience art. I want to share that good, amazing, enchanted world that artists are a part of. So I came up with different donation level lots. That's what I call them, where you give a certain level and you will get a gift. A lot of them are around painting, okay? And before I describe them all, they're all tax deductible, all through the Artist of Frenchman Street. You will get a letter back once you donate to my GoFundMe, and they're all exchangeable, meaning you can make these as gifts. If you don't want it particularly, or you want a friend or kids to have this, that's fine. These are all exchangeable. They all have no time limit. Very briefly, painting, a paint party for friends, for the kids. They can go to my studio. I also will be traveling up to Maryland, and I travel around the country, so I could maybe even meet you. But it'll be in my studio. Paint, clothing that you want to do. Custom painted blazers with logos and colors. Head to toe custom painted outfit. Custom painted piece of furniture that's $650. Paint a part of your house or driveway. I have my driveway painted. It looks spectacular. That's $1,300. 2 abstract paintings of your favorite spots at your house. My sister did that. She loves them. That's $6,000. And the last thing I want to talk about is NFTs. So NFTs, I'm using these paintings to create animated GIFs. Okay, it's because this is the future, right? I'm talking to you over technology. We can't say that the land within this computer isn't real. We spend 75% of our time looking at our phone, and soon it will be right here, right in front of us, creating our entire world around us. And so NFTs, I know, is the future. I'm part of New Society of New Orleans. And so my vision is to paint these paintings with beautiful abstract colors, and just like you saw from before, and have people, when they look, the figures are moving, and the painting is moving, very much like they're doing with the Vincent van Gogh experience here in New Orleans, where they're projecting all the stuff and it becomes 3D and layered, and you get to kind of experience the world, the aesthetic world of Vincent van Gogh as he felt it, doing those things. So that is the end of my presentation. Once again, you can donate at our website, charlesandersonart.com/epic. That will bring us to the GoFundMe. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. My phone number is on there. And I will be putting stuff on my GoFundMe account. Once you donate, you'll be able to hear my progress throughout. And it's probably going to be about a 2-year process. I'm very excited, to get going, to get on this new project. I thank you so much for the people who stayed always to the end to hear about this project. That's great. But really, I've had these ideas for the last 6 months, last year, really over the pandemic. And it's so great to just say these things out to an audience. because it makes it real. Over this week of coming up with this dialogue, I felt like I fast forwarded this whole idea about 2 or 3 months forward, because I knew that there were going to be people there in the audience trying to understand what the heck I'm talking about. So thank you once again. I appreciate y'all. Bye.